Well, this is start time, so let's go ahead and get going. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us for this presentation on teaching tactics here in virtual worlds. We'll be looking at how emerging technology can help bring us together in new and hopefully satisfying ways. My name is Steve Van Hook, or Kip Raffo here in World. I'm an educator and a researcher, and that's what we're going to consider today is research and results in virtual world education. I'm not selling anything. Let's make sure that text is working. There it is. For those of you that are watching for the text, there is a welcome for you as well. I'm glad to see it's working. I'm going to be sharing a number of links as we go, and links to research references and resources. Hopefully there's going to be some useful stuff here for you. You are welcome to grab a PDF of these slides. They have active links in them. If you'd like to follow along, you just click that little I letter there on the bottom of the screen, and that should get you a PDF file of these slides, and I'll be sharing links again later as well, once you've decided if you really want to go through that or not. Here is an abstract today of our topic and a bit more about me. If you're watching a stream or recording, you can also get a PDF file of these slides at my research website. There it is at the bottom of this slide here, wwmr.us. I'll be sharing that link again later. I'm here in sunny Southern California, where it's still about an hour away from noon. If you could type in chat where you are in the world, I'd like to know that. This presentation is a topic that I shared with the Science Circle in Second Life about a year ago on how COVID might impact the education and delivery of it. And back then, there was a big question mark after just about every sentence. We are likely to see some changes from what we've gone through over the last 2 years, going on 3 years, as we try to find a new normal. But it's safe to guess that we are certainly not going to go back to the way things were before, at least not in the near future. Let's go ahead. Let's take a look at how things might be in the months ahead. Let's look at what London-based Global Health Foundation is saying. It says COVID is not going away around the world anytime soon, and we need to learn how to cope with it, thinking and planning and coming to grips with a new way of living. It's an interesting article. You can get the link right there on the slides if you get the PDF. And those of us here in the United States, we also need to keep in mind that more than 95% of the world is not us. I love to see just how spread out we are. Thanks for sharing your locations. And we need to care about that wherever we are in the world. If nothing else, we're all impacted by global supply chain disruption. I will be sharing some data and resources as we go. Much of it will come from this assortment of articles, well, from the Chronicle of Education, Inside Higher Education, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, BBC, Harvard Political Review, and other credible sources. I'll be sharing links to additional resources in these slides. Once again, you can get these slides here in World simply by clicking that little I or going to the website, my academic site. I'll give you that link at the end. I'll be focusing primarily on U.S. news and issues since, well, that's where I am here in California. But, you know, if it's happening here in academia, it's likely happening elsewhere, or at least they're suffering the fallout from our crises. Here are two interesting articles from a recent edition of Inside Higher Education. COVID cuts in international travel have impacted educational exchanges between young creative students all over the world. Oh, that's such a loss. Organizers are trying out different online platforms to increase and improve international collaboration for students. And also virtual job recruiting programs are reaching out to populations of historically marginalized college graduates. They're also looking at technological alternatives to help us do it better. And of course, we're all talking about the metaverse and trying to figure out how people are going to be staking a claim in it or not, avoiding it altogether. Here are 10 companies, according to Gizmodo, that might actually survive all the hype and the recoil of the last months. You can check this story. It's really got great backgrounds and some of the tactics of each of the companies, what they plan to do in the metaverse. And you can get that article by clicking the Gizmodo link in the slide. And of course, way up there at the top is Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, big plans. It's great to see that these immersive virtual worlds are so newsworthy, especially of late. I think that's a good thing. Mark Zuckerberg, well, he calls it the holy grail of social experiences, and well, it's hard to argue with that. Some of us have been there, done that 2 decades ago. Just check out the difference here between the Facebook Meta avatar and contrast it to a sophisticated avatar here in Second Life. We know we're looking good. I love that you got to be kidding look on her face and the look of surprise on the Meta avatar. I really wish I could watch more what's going on in the chat. I know that's where the fun is, Astra getting a giggle out of it. Fortunately, I'm juggling 3 balls here, so if I miss something in the chat, I will come back and review it after the presentation is done. So please do keep the comments, suggestions, questions, criticisms coming. I like it. What I do suggest that if virtual world learning as a platform is conflated with the metaverse debate, well, that might do us some harm. We're not saying people should perpetually live in a digital world, but for the times we do, where would you rather spend an hour of lecture? Zoom is also trying to offer an immersive experience. It's right there along with the speaker or gallery view options in Zoom if you haven't seen it yet. It looks to me like those cutout stand-up signs where you stick your face through a hole. I don't see why people are going to use this when they don't already share their video in regular Zoom meetings. I've led hundreds of these sessions, and I just don't see it working. But Zoom really does, I think, deserve some credit for stepping in and stepping up in this COVID crisis. But certainly we can do better. I'll tell you one thing Zoom has been surprisingly useful for is for a tool for me to demonstrate virtual worlds to hesitant visitors that don't want to download the platform, but they're very curious about getting a look at it. And Second Life actually looks pretty good in Zoom. There's a screenshot right there from my laptop. There is a slight lag as it feeds through, but for the most part, as I zoom around in Second Life, so it zooms in Zoom. I see some comments here. It'd be interesting to hear how some of your own experiences with Zoom are. I get the audio and the video come through fine, and even the dolphin clicks and the chirping birds play through Zoom, and I can give an individual tour or a group tour, how many ever people log into the session. And the good thing about this, most educators are familiar with Zoom these days, and there's no virtual world learning curve as they simply ride along through my avatar's eyes. And this also addresses some of the top concerns I hear from first-time visitors. I'm going to be talking more about how do we bring them in for the first time, hopefully back again for a second time to a virtual world. Some of the comments that I get, that their hesitancy is, well, it's scary. That's probably the number one comment I get, is they're afraid to come in. They're intimidated by it, or it's just too complex. Or they just don't want to sign up for a new account just to come in and check it out. But Zoom, I found, is working very well, and I plan on doing more of those. And there's so much to show. Case in point is all the Science Circle presentations year after year for 15 years now, I believe. It's a true testament to really what virtual worlds can do consistently, with clear vision and good intent and impressive immersive experience. What we have is this wonderful and real sense of place. There is context and proportion and exploration and tactile interactivity and even fun and games. And we don't get that in a Zoom class where every face is flat and in your face, and it's just, I find it exhausting. Much of the time we're talking to a room of shadow silhouettes on top of that. I have recently built a new virtual world educational region, taking advantage of the Linden Laboratory nonprofit rates. Thank you for that, Linden Labs, if you're in the room. And this is specially designed to serve first and likely only one-timers in world for single session seminars. And it's meant as an example of why to come in and teach in virtual worlds rather than the how-to of it. And I found simplicity is key. It's set up so they can follow simple directions to get in world, land at our landing pad, walk a little bit, and then sit in an auditorium. And there's tutorials as well that they get: how to walk, how to fly, how to adjust your avatar, how to go shopping, stuff like that. There's minimal clicks, no poses, no automatic note cards, and it's meant to minimize this cognitive overload and system freeze. We all get it. I got it just trying to find my seat here today, and I've been in World 15 years now. And sometimes, you know, the most difficult educators to get in world, I found, are the ones that have already been here before, and they found too many challenges, or they had an unpleasant experience and they're not too eager to come back. So this, using the Zoom, is a gentle way to reorient them to what this is all about, especially if it's been 5-10 years since they've been away. And yes, I tell them there's nasty stuff going on in the virtual worlds, just like in the real world, but there's also wonderful free concerts and exhibits and conferences and lectures and experiential learning. And just like the real world, everyone gets to choose where they want to hang out. I have long been a fan of the concept of immersive virtual world learning, and there's really nothing new here. My whole life, I've watched it growing as we have been tapping old technologies, trying to find new ways of teaching and engaging people. There was the show Winky, Dink. I'm really dating myself here. Started way back in the 50s, and Bill Gates praised it as the very first interactive television program. And you had this magic screen on your TV set. You can see it there on the slide. And you could become engineers or tacticians or part of the program by drawing bridges and ropes and cages to save the day. And it encouraged children to be innovative and creative problem solvers. And those of us who couldn't afford the 50 cents, well, for the magic screen, we just drew right on the TV. It was a fun program. And then there was the Gumby Show, also an immersive, engaging experience. That was in the 60s, and it let us break through the flat dimensional world of physical books into the living, rich worlds of clay-mated animation. And my favorite were the space travels. That theme song still echoes in my head all these years later. And then there was the inner space ride at Disneyland. Maybe you remember that. I think that was around well into the 60s. And it shrunk us down to subatomic size so we could ride through the molecules and atoms of a snowflake. And suddenly there was the red pulsating nucleus. Does anybody remember that? Oh, there's somebody who remembers the coupon rides. I think actually this was one of those A-ticket rides or a free ride sponsored by Monsanto. But aren't we doing similar things right now with exhibits in virtual worlds? I know we are. Rides through major organs and such. And then movies picked up on this as well, shrinking us down to cellular size to traverse a human body. That was in the film Fantastic Voyage. It's still worth a watch. I think it's on Netflix. What a fun movie that is. And it's a natural inclination of children and students and even we jaded academes. We don't want to just observe something. We want to experience it. We want to meld with it. We don't want to just look it through windows. We want to become a part of it, and we want to share that experience with others. And even at just 7 or 8 years old, I felt this was the way education should be. Such visualizations and imaginings can be more than educational. They can also be foundational and formational. It's a low-stakes experience with modeling behavior. Here's an interesting article on cosplay and the power of pretend, and it tells how heroic stories and pretend experiences can create an emotional response of elevation. And there's a link on this slide if you want to dig into that deeper. And for example, they did a virtual reality study, and those who were given the power of flight like a superhero were significantly more likely to be helpful than those who simply got to fly around as a passenger in a helicopter. And they got to feel a little bit how a superhero feels in flight. And that's what elevation is about. A very interesting article here, if you'd like to check on that. And here's another example. Studies show that when people have an immersion into someone else's experience, it creates an empathic response, experiencing like what it's like perhaps to switch gender or races, or to experience life in a war zone with bombs exploding around you, or spending your days in a wheelchair. And this could be used, for example, in human resources sensitivity training. And virtual immersion, what else does it do? It provides a sense of place. And one of the most memorable aspects of an education is that sense of place, as they show in this New York Times article here, that years after a student's education, it's the imagery that remains, the taste of the experience. Second Life founder Philip Rosedale, he said recently, one reason virtual worlds have proven so attractive to educators and students is our desire for company in learning. We want to look at each other. We want to see facial expressions and gestures, and even if we're alone at our desk. And it's not just our desire for that sense of other, but also our desire for a sense of place. I know I'm preaching to the choir on that one. New technologies, I think, are going to make the experience even more immersive and realistic, tickling all our fancies, literally. Mark Zuckerberg has been thinking about the merging virtual worlds and education for a long time, and even spent $2 billion for Oculus with that immersive goal back in 2014, and we got an early Oculus headset and played with it for a while. My quintessential millennial did too. We played some games and some educational programs, but it felt more like a division between us rather than something we shared together. So we put it down after about an hour and haven't played with it since. We feel the same way about 3D movies. I bought the special glasses and the 3D player and the custom TV and the 3D DVDs, but we quickly tire of that. We still love our movies. We just don't need to take it too far. And, it's not just the movies. It's the movie theater. It's the coming together that we enjoy. And, sometimes tech can just get in the way of that. But certainly new technology may make virtual worlds more accessible on our smartphones and pads. Right now, there are 6 billion mobile phones globally, give or take a few. 5 billion of those are in developing countries where it is their sole means of access to the internet. But cell phones are becoming ever cheaper, and network bandwidth is doubling every 18 months and expanding into rural areas worldwide. Internet tablets, internet-enabled tablets, where they're now the fastest ramping device around the world, and solar tablets as well are especially promising in areas where electricity is iffy. And as we consider technological access, we also have to consider socially appropriate access. How can we connect with a global student body in a ways that are inclusive and engaging? Well, that's a bigger challenge, I think, than the technological challenge. Well, by necessity, we typically use English as our common language. 25% of the world speaks it, at least conversationally, as a second language. It's our common language right now in this seminar, gathering people from around the world. But we also need to consider, beyond the language, a cross-culturally resonant context to build better bridges between peoples, culturally inclusive case studies and discussion topics. And hopefully through that, by finding our common ground, well, we come to better appreciate and respect and enjoy one another's differences. And you can find a link. My UNESCO article on transcultural learning is there. It's a link to that. It's available in the slides. You can get a full text copy of that article on my site. Well, over some 20 years, I have been designing and developing online and on-ground undergrad and graduate courses for UCSB, UCLA, California, Lutheran University, Ellis University, National University, and elsewhere. More than half of the courses I've taught are online. Right now, they're almost all online. So the place has been limited to the learning platform we gather in, whether it's Blackboard or Canvas or Collaborate or Brightspace or whatever. These platforms, they provide a sense of gathering, but they don't provide that sense of place. And it's given me a sense of what works and what administrators are looking for and what students like, though these often aren't necessarily the same thing. And for 15 years, I've been experimenting with virtual educational builds. For a few years, the Science Circle let me huddle in a corner where I set up some sample learning demonstrations. Thank you so much for that, Science Circle. I miss you guys. I've been pitching and prodding administrators to take a closer look at virtual world possibilities for about a dozen years. I do agree with many of the critics right off the start. Yeah, that learning in virtual worlds can be a poor substitute for the real life thing. I wish everyone around the world could join me in a classroom there at Kirchhoff Hall on the UCLA campus, my favorite building. I took this picture myself. And there's some of my Korean students standing in front of the building. It is a gorgeous building, reeking of the finest academic trappings and tradition. But, you know, the ideal learning environment, which we don't have, of course, would be a diverse and well-appointed campus serving all comers, fully equipped classrooms and reasonable numbers of students in the class, and, of course, justly compensated instructors. That unfortunately is not where we're at, and it's certainly not where we're headed. Any administrators and educators in the room, you know, that's for sure. It's also been said the ideal teaching environment is Socrates on one end of a log and a student on the other end. But, you know, that's not going to happen either unless they're virtual logs and a virtual Socrates. We can't even build enough simple classrooms, at least in the developing world, for millions, if not billions, of aspiring learners. So we as intentioned. I really want to dig into this chat. I know you guys are having some fun. What we do as well-intentioned and practical educators, well, we're going to turn to technology to fill the gaps, as we have done for decades before, all the way back to Winky Dink at the birth of television itself. Isn't that interesting? The first, one of the very first shows on television was such an innovative educational program. Giving a plug back to Winky Dink again. Well, let's take a quick look. What's been happening in academia over the many months since the COVID crisis began? It's been more of a morphing change than a revolution or redesign. The transformational forces before COVID, they were already in play. Lower state funding and a demographic dip in enrollments and administrators stressing over budget cuts and program reductions, and up to 30% of a university's revenue comes from dorms and dining. That's been a big loss and one reason they're so eager to get students back on campus. And these are forces that have been simmering and expanding for decades now. And now the blinds on many of our social systems are being lifted everywhere, and we can see clear just what's behind the curtain. Yes, adjunctification is actually a Googleable word. Go ahead and do that. Adjunctification of education. Spread the word too, because I think it's not a really good trend, and it hasn't been going well. Here's some interesting, innovative steps that they've taken at a couple of universities where I teach. After COVID closed the UCLA campus early in the COVID crisis, they put up a virtual campus in Minecraft. It was interesting to look at. I don't think they've done much with it. It's interesting to note it was paid for out of the Bruin Gaming Fund. That seems worth noting. And National University has worked on an artificial intelligence program to help engage students in online classes. I think one of my administrators from National University may be here today. If you're in the audience, give a holler out. The goal of this program, Artificial Intelligence Program, is to better engage all the online students in the course discussions and tasks, and to provide students with suggestions on how to do better. Artificial intelligence ultimately is going to come for us all, isn't it? Well, perhaps one of the biggest obstacles to beneficial change is our negativity bias. And oh boy, we sure see that at play today, don't we? We pay hyper attention to the things that might harm us or could be dangerously unproven. And, that's a survival advantage. I understand it. We have a negative bias to bad threats over the possible good. And actually, we can even measure that. It's a ratio of 5-to-1, says psychologist in an article you can click on this side. It takes one positive thought to counter a negative is not enough. Equal time is not enough. We need to bury a negative under a pile of positives. And this isn't being optimistic or looking at the world through rose-colored glasses. It's just understanding the dynamics of humans and being real and dealing with it. It's a wonder we do anything, thunders. Yes. I think also to serve our students best, we need to know them well. And in the 20 years I've been teaching, the largest group of students working their way through the program have been millennials. They were just turning 19 when I started back at UCSB in 2000, and they're still in my graduate courses. And there's the Gen Zers that are their livelier, younger sisters and brothers now in my undergrad classes. And as an aging hippie from the 70s, oh, there's my hippie picture right there on the screen. I was a long-hair, red-headed hippie. I've felt a special affinity with the millennials. Go hippies. Any hippies in the room, let me tell you, take a good look at these millennials. I'm sure you have. These newer generations, they seem much more focused on social issues and justice with this get over it attitude towards racism and sexism and intolerance and bullying. And I really admire that. Their spirit of change and possibilities. All you hippies go out and mentor a millennial. Here's a few interesting bits about them. Thunder hanging up moccasins in 78. Tagline, good to see you in the room. Some interesting things about the millennials. Those in the upper economic tiers of millennials are about to inherit some $30 trillion from the retiring and expiring boomers over the next decade. What else are we going to see in them? More and more of what's interesting, more and more of these millennial heirs about to receive this money are saying they don't want that uber wealth. And news reports tell about how they plan to give much of that money away. Including the real estate and the art and the jewels. And no doubt that's harsh news to their elders. And this also coincides with a greater bulk of younger age groups who are unable to find well-paying jobs with any kind of future. And that is so sad, the depression and the high rates of drug abuse and self-harm that are coming from that. And not everyone wants or needs to go to school as a possible alternative, but for those who do, we can make learning more accessible and more inclusive and more engaging and more relevant, even more fun. Beth saying how hard it is to see the children go through that. It breaks my heart when the students come up to me after class and ask for my advice. I don't know what to tell them other than to be prepared for anything. And something else to consider, if predictions hold true with leaps in healthcare, such as 3D printing of major organs and robotic surgery, ever better levels of nutrition. If, as we see all this take place, millennials and their near generational cohorts may well live hundreds of years. This current generation may even see upwards towards 700-year lifespan. So we really need to teach them well. Here is another prediction. By the year 2050, some futurologists and economists say artificial intelligence and robots will be replacing workers at all levels, including us instructors, in entrenching this new breed of people that the Guardian called a useless class of those people that are not just unemployed, but unemployable. There's simply not going to be work out there. What are we going to do with these people? And someone said it's not that they're born with two strikes against them that's so unfair. It's that they don't even get that third pitch. It's something we really need to keep an eye on. What are we going to do? And that's the challenge for this new generation coming up, our generation, us oldsters. Well, we brought a lot of technology into the world. Well, now here's the even bigger challenges. How are we going to distribute all of that? One interesting point in this article is they said as a substitute for employment, they predict that virtual reality worlds may ultimately provide people with far more excitement and emotional engagement than the real outside world. These virtual worlds, well, they also provide a sense of place and belonging, so important to student success and retention. We all know that. So much of the college experience is not sitting in a classroom. We can do that just about as well online. But students are looking to mix and mingle and play and party and experiment and socialize, and that's what they might remember most and ultimately benefit from the most come the end of their education. The more we can connect with them in a context of place, the longer they may stay connected with us. You can always tell whenever I take a quick peek at the chat, that's where I lose my place in the line for a whole days. Now I'm getting hungry for a nice burrito here in Southern California. We got great burritos. Here are some takeaways from a webinar. It was actually a fascinating webinar not too long ago. Philip Rosedale was there, the CEO of High Fidelity at the time, and he was founder of Linden Labs. I believe he's back at Linden Labs now. And also on this panel was tech evangelist Robert Scoble, and they were previewing some emerging technologies such as Sansar at the time. And when asked about educational uses of the new immersive technology, they gave an in-depth response, and you can find a link to the video and the session notes on this slide. They weren't there to talk about education, but given the chance, they really had quite a bit to say. And actually, here's some of it. They said that students are already using AR and VR glasses to learn repair of multi-million-dollar Caterpillar tractors and Boeing jet engines with virtual overlays. And we can also take a meeting in Yosemite at a finger snap and study the principles of gravity between planets by actually flying through the universe. And we can visualize complex equations in math and physics and chemistry with 3D models. Isn't that all exciting? But they also point out that the cost of this virtual world design may not come cheap. They pointed out that the budget for the video game Grand Theft Auto 5 was some $400 million just for a single game, and effective virtual world learning experiences will also be costly. But the cost, and this is the good news, the cost for virtual world teaching and simply hanging out and giving talks on a stage like this, well, these are simple and inexpensive ideas that are going to carry the day, where the physicality of place and manipulating objects with your hands is just magical. So say Scoble and Rosedale. I also caught an interview on CNET in early 2022. Philip Rosedale again says that virtual reality headsets for fully 3D immersion are not quite ready for prime time play. I agree. They can be alienating and isolating from our real life surroundings. Not everyone is going to want to do that. What did Rosedale said? It's like a blindfold to the real world, he says here on the slide. But even without the encumbrance of headsets, we still need to answer why this particular platform serves the experience and good of our guests. We've got to get to the why of it, says Rosedale. And I think we educators may have some worthwhile suggestions on that. In fact, here are a few suggestions to those designing virtual worlds and technologies for educators, especially as we get ready for showtime. First, it's time to polish up everything and get ready for closer scrutiny, because they are looking closer than they ever have before. Online learning is only going to grow now that we've seen the need and the service potential. Many students may not like learning online, but more and more are starting to actually demand it. Also, the educational platforms and programs and companies need to better understand the particular demands of academia, especially the old stodgy administrators who don't understand the tech, and they just want to go back to the old ways and the old days. There's also very limited funds available in academia right now, but there is money out there. And there's also the overhead demands, and this is one of the big ones, the overhead demands on students to learn a new platform, to learn new skills. And on top of that, there's the Title IX horrors over privacy and harassment in virtual worlds, and performance standards that universities are very sensitive to accreditation. Again, I've been pitching virtual world learning to administrators for some 15 years. This is typically what they reply. They say there's too much development time and cost, too high of a learning curve for teachers and students to learn the platform with too little practical use. You've all heard this, I'm sure. What we need to bring in, we need the accessibility of Skype, where a single step gets you to where you need to be. We need the creative and simple filters of TikTok for design. We need the functionality of Zoom, where slides and video and audio and files are easily shared with a single click. It's easier to demonstrate a virtual world in Zoom than to bring them into the virtual world. So we need to make some of these changes. Some of them are already happening. We also need to counter what may be a gaming bias in some administrators, especially in higher education. Virtual world learning, well, it may not be a game in the mind of us users, but others don't always see it the same way. And you know what? I say, so what? Learning can be fun and gamified. I've been playing on the language app Duolingo. I know some of you have played with this. I studied 2 years of Russian in college. I lived in Russia for 5 years. And speaking the language, I've forgotten most of it, but I've relearned lots about grammar and vocabulary in just 2 weeks on this app. It's fun, it's engaging, it's certainly educational. And on the games, you know, I watch my goddaughter play video games. She plays Monster Hunter, League of Legends, Cyberpunk, and she sure seems to spend a lot of time running from place to place and exploring. And she says that's what makes it fun. It's that sense of place and space and motion. Unfortunately, we've also seen that some of the new technologies aren't always doing what we hoped they would. Students were given access to network computers to enhance learning, but a Duke University study found that test scores in reading and math were actually falling and that students in the one laptop per child program were spending more times in games and chat and less on actual studies. And we also have to work harder to bridge the digital divide, especially between rich and poor countries, mostly split between the northern and the southern hemispheres, and between poor and rich communities within individual countries. We also need to make sure that this digital divide isn't further compounded by a content divide. We need appropriate course materials that connect and resonate across national, cultural, economic boundaries, and that's an issue dear to me and core to my research. And yes, it can all be very expensive, but someone's going to do it. And there are many government programs around the world supporting better access to education. Here are a few on this slide. And there's also supporting foundations with familiar names: Gates, Jobs, Saylor. And schools may also well be shifting money and from lowering classroom and facility costs, hopefully to new and better online options, as they're convinced to give them a try. And we need to see the big picture, not just the view from our own perch as educators. We need to appreciate the practical realities of administrators, something sometimes we teachers don't do. We need to understand the desires and needs of our younger students. They are certainly facing a very different world and future than we did. And we have to nurture creative abilities and aspirations of educators and not just treat them like machine cogs. That's for us adjunctified teachers here in the room. And we need to embrace the ultimate possibilities and immediate limitations of learning technologies. And everything else really is just what we always do, is teaching and learning and using all the techniques that we already know to their fullest as educators. And I think we've also done very well at adapting to this crisis as educators, as administrators and students. It's really been inspiring to me to see just what we can do when we must. I am coming up on the final minutes here. I am watching the clock as we approach the 11:50, or the 10 minutes away from the top. So here we are, sitting in a very difficult spot of preparing for a future still so much in the fog. Here is some basic advice on what we must do. First, from a troll who says, when we can't see the future, what we should do is simply the next right thing. So let's try to keep our eyes on the next right thing, not get overwhelmed by the horizon of it. And here's some advice, speaking of the horizon, from a 10-year sea captain, something as I tell my passengers before we depart. There on this slide there, you can see a crew of German students from my international program at UCSB. I tell them, keep one hand on the boat, keep one hand on yourself, and keep a weather eye on the horizon. We need to be aware of our immediate times and our circumstances for sure. But if we don't watch the horizon for the subtle shifts in what's coming, well, we could wind up really, really wet. And that's it. I thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoy the rest of your time here at the conference. Already I'm getting requests for rides. I'd love to take everybody out. Hopefully we will be back in another year to discuss how the world has gone from too many questions to a place with plenty of answers, and perhaps we can find even better ways to reach out and teach others. And feel free to drop me an email, visit some of the resources I have. Educare Research, it's a nonprofit organization. My region here in Second Life is a nonprofit. We're not trying to sell anything or make any money off of you. Do feel free to pay a visit. And if you click the I again on this screen here, you can get a copy of the slides that will include landmarks to Educare Research. And that takes us up exactly to 50 minutes of the hour. At this point, I'm going to turn you all back to the conference. Please enjoy your time here, and thank you again so much